Today I'm bringing you for a personal tour of my private bonsai collection. Now, I've been growing bonsai for over 55 years and looking after most of these trees in my personal collection for most of my life. Today what I'd like to do is show you many of the trees, and especially I have some favorite specimens that probably have never been seen before by the general public. So let's take a tour of my collection and look at a few of the interesting trees that you'll discover today. Having a bonsai collection is perhaps the greatest mirror of life itself. These trees, silent, patient, enduring, remind us that time does not pass us by, it cultivates us. Each branch, each scar, each curve carries a story of seasons endured and storms survived. To shape a bonsai is to shape one's own spirit. It is a dialogue between man and nature, where both grow quieter and wiser with time. You come to believe that mastery isn't about control, but about listening to what the tree has to say and to what time whispers between the leaves. My name is David Easterbrook. I'm the former curator of the Montreal Botanical Gardens bonsai collection, where I worked for over 30 years. I retired about 13 years ago now. I'm also one of the founders of the Montreal Bonsai and Penjing Society that we started in 1978. I've also done extensive touring and teaching throughout North America and also in Europe. I'm still doing it, as a matter of fact. So today I'm going to be showing you a few of the trees in my collection, giving you a few brief descriptions. I hope you'll enjoy them. As you know, I am a bonsai professional. I've done this my whole life. But before I started working at the Montreal Botanical Garden, I was passionate about bonsai. I had started at a very young age. So I already had my own bonsai collection and have managed to maintain it over many decades. It was tough. I had to get up every morning at 4 or 5 o'clock to get my watering done, again in the evenings. It was never easy, but I've managed to do it throughout my whole life. It's proof of my discipline and love of these trees. I started collecting and growing bonsai in about the late 70s. Then I went to Japan to do an apprenticeship for almost a year in 1980. So during that time, I just planted my trees in the ground. A lot of them didn't survive that year, but when I came back, I started growing bonsai in earnest. And that is really the beginning of my bonsai collection, the beginning of the 80s. For 35 years, we lived in an old stone farmhouse north of Montreal. I had an acre of land and grew my bonsai collection there. It was very open. We were surrounded by fields under cultivation, so it was very windy, direct sunlight. It was great for some trees, the conifers, less so for Japanese maples, for example. It was too hot and dry. But then again, it was a great experience. And about 13 years ago, we moved west of Montreal and in a more forested area where we're surrounded by tall trees, more shade. So I have to keep my conifer collection out here basically in the driveway, whereas the deciduous trees are kept in a shadier area, which they don't mind because of global warming. I don't want direct sunlight on them in any case. I've acquired trees in dribs and drabs over the years. on my travels, local nurseries also, growing a lot of bonsai from seedlings, from cuttings, a lot of air layers. I'd say half of my collection was created from air layers. So I'd like to show you some interesting specimens today that I think you'll enjoy watching. We'll start with the junipers, and you can see some of these trees are actually quite old. This one came from Old Mill Nursery in Pennsylvania. The owner has now passed away, but it wasn't like that. It was just a neglected nursery tree when I got it, and I actually had to use rebar to bring all the branches forward. This juniper here is actually a garden juniper, I believe a cultivar named Gray Owl, that I acquired from Sandy Anderson, who lived near Burlington, Vermont. I acquired it about, I don't know, 11 or 12 years ago, and have been improving it ever since. This one came from Hollow Creek Farm outside of Rochester, and it's sadly in need of a pruning and wiring, which I will do this winter during the slow period. We have a very nice, very elegant, classical, upright San Jose juniper that I created into a bonsai probably over 20 years ago, sold to one of my clients, and just reacquired it about 4 or 5 years ago. It does need work also. This two-trunk San Jose juniper was originally done as a demonstration for an Ikebana society in 1983. It originally had 3 trunks, and the third trunk was actually removed, air layered, and this was the third trunk here. So you can see that I've kept the infant next to its mother. I love slanting style bonsai. This one here is on a lovely slab made by a fellow named Kyle from Vermont. Here we have an interesting San Jose juniper. About 2 years ago, I transformed it from an upright tree into a semi-cascade. So you can see that it was completely tilted over in its pot. The Japanese say that junipers should look like dragons crawling along on the ground with their claws and teeth sticking out. So you really do need to have a lot of twists and turns, a lot of dead wood, a lot of snags, gins, and a lot of dead wood along the trunk, which is called sherry. That's what really makes a good quality juniper bonsai. I also really think that junipers and rocks go together, because when I go collecting junipers, that's where I find them, on cliffs and rocky outcroppings. So here's a wonderful stone that I actually collected on Vancouver Island in British Columbia, and I planted it with some Itoigawa Shimpaku junipers many years ago, and you can see all around how they're growing. I've planted them in the cracks and crevices of this stone. It's very heavy. I can barely lift it up now. Even though I'm getting on in years, I still like to create. And so every year I try to create new specimens, and each one has to be, in my opinion, better than the previous one. So I'm always experimenting, I'm trying out new techniques, new styles, and that's the challenge in bonsai. Here we have a 2-trunk San Jose juniper, actually purchased from a local nursery, but this was actually done in a workshop with Jim Barrett in about 1995, I believe. So you can see that the trees get older, the trunks get thicker, and they get more and more interesting with age. Also, you can see that I had an orange flag on this tree. This is the time of year that I'm scraping deadwood. Also, at this time of year, I have a miniature power washer that I bought from Japan. It looks like a gun, and I'm washing down all of the deadwood, the shari and the deadwood. So the white means that the wood has to be washed. My orange flag means the wood has been washed, and I've let it dry for 2 or 3 days, and it's due for being lime sulfured, which will whiten but also preserve the dead wood. Finally, there's blue flags also. Blue flags mean that the dead wood has already been lime sulfured, and the blue flag now means that we have to put a wood hardener at the base of the dead wood so the dead wood won't rot away where it meets the ground. So these are codes for myself and my students of what we are doing at this time of year. Here we have a common juniper collected from the northern regions of Quebec. They're hard to collect, but they make wonderful bonsai. Here we have another wonderful forest of dwarf Alberta spruce. Spruce are probably the most common tree in all of Canada. It's used as a lumber tree. I really had to have a dwarf Alberta spruce forest in my collection. This is a root-connected larch forest that I just recently did 2 years ago on this beautiful rock. So it's still in formation and development. It will be really interesting because it has great perspective, great depth of field. So I'm looking forward to seeing this in a few years or presenting it in a show. Now we're at my table of larch forests. One of my pride and joys, which I bought from a friend of mine, is this multiple trunk. It's called a kabudachi, many trunks sharing the same root base, larch grouping. And this was presented in not the last national this past fall, but 2 years previous to that. Many people told me how much they enjoyed seeing it. You can have also miniature, very dwarf forests on rocks. This is not a dwarf variety, a dwarf genetic. It's a regular larch grouping, okay, the regular tree. Here we have 2 root-connected clumps, or you can call them forests, but they were basically one tree in nature, and they were found growing naturally like this. So you can see both of these, different styles, but found like this in situ. This forest is different. This forest was actually assembled from individual trees. They call this style Yosei-ue style in Japanese. Now the challenge here was finding enough very, very old trees. The big ones with the rough bark were relatively easy to find or to grow. It's the very small ones with rough bark because they had to be very, very old, show age, but be very small to provide depth to my forest. So the challenge was finding smaller rough bark trees. These are probably the best trees that were ever collected on the tundra of the far north of Quebec. Everyone that comes here marvels at the age and the humongous trunks. So I have 4 of them. I call them my 4 old friends. I have this one with amazing deadwood. This one, which most people think is my logo tree. I love it very much, but it's not my logo tree. Oddly enough, this was probably the easiest tree to collect that I've ever collected, because where I went collecting on the far north shore, it was very mountainous tundra, and there was only one path that led between the mountains from the highway. And probably at the very beginning of the path was this about 5-meter tree, 15 meters high, right at the beginning. And it was a little bit straighter, and everybody had gone by it. Nobody even bothered thinking to collect it. So I dug it out, cut off the top of the tree here and here, and brought up a side branch to become a new top. Also, some of the branches were too long. You can see how this branch here was shortened by curling it back on itself. So they do take a lot of work. This root was hollowed out with a Makita die grinder with a samurai bit to hollow it out to make it look more tapered. So there is quite a lot of work involved in creating large-sized larch bonsai. This is the 3rd of my 4 biggies, and this really required an extreme transformation. The trunk was cut off here, A smaller branch was brought up to form a new apex, and a smaller branch was brought down to create lower branching. This branch here was very long and straight, and in order to make it a second trunk, I sawed partially through this branch and bent it back on itself 3 times. 1, 2, and 3, to shorten this very extremely long 6-foot long branch so it would fit within my triangle. Many people think this style of tree reminds them of a penjing. Maybe one of the reasons is there was a space under the trunk, and I wanted to fill it with a rock and looked for it for years, and finally was given this yin tack stone that fit perfectly in the empty space. So it is a yin tack stone, and also the shape of this tree looks more like a Chinese penjing, which I find is fascinating because I find it's a really sinuous tree, quite graceful and sinuous. My 4th biggie tree is still in development. I started working on it probably about, 10 or 12 years ago. It took many years to find the perfect pot to suit the tree. And as you can see, the tree has a very unusual shape. It was found curling back on itself. Now, I did kill part of the original apex and guy wired this branch over the top to create a new apex here. So it's still in development. I still have the lower part to wire, but I think it's an absolutely fascinating tree because of that unusual movement. I really do like upright style bonsai. This is a very vertical tree, almost a shokan or a formal upright. This was found growing naturally in the far north. The top had actually been broken and was still alive and hanging from here. And only a few years later, I ripped it down the trunk. I will be enlarging the shari on this trunk, but it's very elegant as a tree, and I think it's a very dignified tree. So I really do like formal upright trees. Another unusual style which really suits larch or tamarack is a Literati style. Literati, the Japanese word is a bunjin style. It's really not a style. It's an abstract form that's totally creative, that's very artistic. There's no rules or regulations for it. And you can see this very old specimen of larch in that style here. They're characterized by a very long, narrow trunk, a very old trunk with some unusual curves and movement, very few branches to bring out the beauty of its trunk. This one here is probably my favorite Literati. As you can see, Literati should look like very old and gnarled and gaunt. And this tree, I think, exemplifies all of those descriptions. It's absolutely one of my favorites. Another fascinating style for larch is the windswept style. And this was an old trunk that I found neglected. I think the mother tree had been collected by someone else, and this one had a few roots and was just left there. I loved the deadwood and collected it and transformed it into this windswept style. And I'm really quite proud of the way it turned out. Right now, I find that this beautiful old slate stone is really beautiful, but I find visually it's too heavy for the tree. So I'm trying to find a smaller stone, maybe slightly upraised, so that the tree will take the primary role, not the stone. Some trees remind me of old friends. This tree belonged to one of my good friends. His name was Serge Robidou, and unfortunately Serge died 3.5 years ago at the very young age of 65. This was one of his favorite trees here. I can see why he loved it. The beautiful Ikari gin, the anchor of God gin here. The movement of the trunk, the style he gave the trunk is stunning. It's actually a beautiful, beautiful larch. Serge was not a bonsai professional. He was actually an architect. and a very good one at that. He was very meticulous in his work. He created beautiful quality bonsai, beautifully crafted. Every time I water this tree, I think of his painstaking work on his collection. You know, a bonsai is an ongoing work, so I am trying to carry on Serge's work, continue improving the tree with every passing season so that it'll be even more and more beautiful every year. Now, many of you will remark that my trees have a distinctly yellowish hue to them. It's not because they're sick or they lack iron. Today is the 5th of October and the foliage is changing color. In the next 2 weeks, all of these larch will be a riot of golden yellows, and then the foliage will fall by the end of October, beginning of November, when they go completely dormant. But a beautiful time of year to view larches. This is an interesting tree, still in development. You can see the extensive guy wiring everywhere. The branches, many of the branches are still heavily wired with copper wire. So it's still under development, but it reminds me of a Chinese style. And it's called the young leading the old by the hand. So we've got the young and the older one here like this. So it's a very poetic style. This branch is being tugged forwards, and I'm going to make a two-layer, two-level branch out of this. There is an extensive branch in the back here, which I will simply remove. All of this thick branch right here. So I've been steadily removing parts of this tree over the years. Still in development. Another king-size bonsai in my collection. This is a very tall, windswept larch. It was shown about 6 years ago at the U.S. National Exhibition, and since then I decided to make it much more dynamic by redoing the top to make it much more wind-blown. So the top is still under development. One of the outstanding things about this bonsai is the pot it's planted in. It is actually a rock, and it's a real Karama stone. I had been looking for something interesting to put on this tree, and when I discovered it in Japan, I actually had to buy it for over $1,000 and have it shipped back to Montreal because I knew it would be perfect for this larch. Although it does make it very heavy to carry around, I do need help. Now we have another section of my larch collection. I call these the mid-sized larch, and this one here is an utterly fascinating cascading style. It's actually Suthin Succulovisit's favorite tree in my collection. It's so beautiful, the movement, the way it flows downwards. This spring it was covered with hundreds of little red cones. They've now ripened and turned brown. A beautiful old tree in the cascade style. Here, this mid-sized tree is a beautiful tree. Look at that beautiful dead wood moving all the way up the trunk toward the top. And the thick, powerful root base of this tree, all in a very small, compact pot. Another great mid-sized tree, very compact, beautifully tapered trunk, some nice movement in there, and some great dead wood in the back of the tree peeking out through the foliage masses. I really enjoy this tree very, very much. Here's a great little tree. Look at that wonderful snake-like trunk, the way it coils on itself all around, the constant movement in such a short, small, compact tree. Wonderful, wonderful what nature can do. Again, a naturally formed clump that has all the charm of a little wild grouping in nature that you can see on an isolated cliff top. Here the trees are slightly leaning forwards, and some of the trunks are actually crossing, which I think gives this tree complete naturalness and charm. This is one of my favorite larch bonsai. It's very, very rare to see larch growing in a full cascade or kengai style. Now, this took a tremendous amount of effort to create this style. This tree's trunk was literally over 10 feet long, and it was bent back on itself 3 times to shorten and compact this tree. So you can see where the first bend was created, where my hand is over here, and then it was bent back over here, and another section was bent upwards, which was actually the tail end of the tree, to create a new apex. Now, I had a table specifically made to show this tree, and I'm dying to put it in the U.S. National Exhibition in Rochester. So let's hope I'll be able to do that in the near future. I love this tree. Check out this old eroded trunk, rotted out in the middle. Absolutely beautiful. Look at this tree's powerful trunk, the powerful curve that moves upwards and then curves back on itself and back on itself again, right to the apex of the tree. Here we have a really amazing 2-trunk style. The mother tree with the ura or the dead wood, a bit of shari, and the way the trunk comes over, and we have a protecting branch over the younger tree. They were found like this, the old tree with its progeny right next to it. Here we have a natural nursery, or almost a raft style, but there's more depth to it. All these trees, all these trunks are root connected, and it's being shown, or it's being trained into much more slanting and a windswept style. Moving on from my larches, I want to show you my pine collection. I really do love working on pines also. So here we have a beautiful Scots pine, a cultivar called Bouvrenensis that was developed in England, in the UK. Very beautiful Japanese red pine, Pinus densiflora, that I actually grew from seed. Japanese red pines are very hardy, so I planted it in the ground north of Montreal, where it's very cold, and grew it in the ground for close to 30 years. It wasn't affected at all by the cold. So great tree for northern latitudes. Here we have a wonderful Japanese 5-needle pine. Sometimes they call it a Japanese white pine. This is a cultivar that has very bluish needles, and it has been grown in the semi-cascade style. You can see that it was originally grafted onto another pine so that it would become more vigorous, and the trunk was heavily wired to create beautiful curves in our trunk. Here we have some Japanese black pines, Pinus thunbergi, and this one here in my left hand was actually imported from Japan quite a few years ago by one of my students. They're wonderful trees to work with, but they're not quite hardy in Montreal and need more protection. Another mid-sized Japanese black pine. They can be grown in all shapes and styles. They do make wonderful bonsai because they're faster growing, they're very vigorous, they make wonderful bonsai. Here we have some native jack pines. They're both being in development, they're both being refined. The secondary trunk will be cut off here, and the top will be made into a gin. A Swiss stone pine here. Here we have a lovely, very old Japanese 5-needle pine, originally grafted onto a Japanese black pine. This tree is over 60 years old, very dignified as a tree, quite lovely, the slow, gentle movement toward the apex of the tree. Another tree in the pine family is the Cedars or cedar. This here is a blue atlas cedar. It's a cultivar, very bluish. This tree was created in a workshop with Ryan Neal by one of my students. She had an extensive collection of bonsai, very beautiful trees, and I worked on her collection with her for almost 20 years, and she just had to recently give up her collection for health problems. This is a cultivar of a Scots pine, Pinus sylvestris, and it was actually grown from seed by a friend of mine. He had collected over 10,000 seeds, and about 6,000 of them germinated. He kept only 11 of the shortest, straightest needle pines, and this here was number 11. So this one dates back to the late 1970s as a tree. I also have some American 5-needle pines in my collection, Pinus strobus. This here is a Pinus strobus. It was found as a youngster growing in a field, and I've been working on it for over 30 years. And its next door neighbor, which has not been wired yet, is a Pinus strobus nana, a dwarf variety of our native white pine. Here we have a Cedars deodara, which is actually a Himalayan cedar. So you can see that the needles are a little bit longer and looser than the Atlas cedars or the cedars of Lebanon. Still a wonderful tree though to work with. My student Giselle actually bought it at a nursery in Boston. Actually, it wasn't very promising at the time, but we wired it all up, and I promised her with time it would turn out to be quite a wonderful bonsai. It has developed to its full potential. Not enough people work with native bonsai. This is a Canadian hemlock that was dug out of the edge of a forest. You can see the deadwood here that's been treated. Now this tree is still in development. All these upper branches will be thinned out and also wired slightly downwards to age the tree, to create a look of age. This pine here is an Austrian black pine, Pinus nigra. Very few people think to use Austrian black pines because the needles are quite long, but really they are straight. They do make an interesting tree. This whole tree was created from the first branch of a very thick trunk. I've had this tree for over 40 years now, and I showed it for the first time at our local club show just about 3 weeks ago. We're on a table of Cypress or false cypress. This here is a Cypress piscifera. The cultivar name is Boulevard or Cyanoviridis, and you can see it's a very bluish colored needle. This tree was actually in the US National Show about 10 years ago. This forest is actually a Cypress clump. It was actually a mutation growing on one of my Cypress. So it was actually developed from a witch's broom. And so it doesn't have a cultivar name because I developed it myself. They're all root connected. It's all one tree, and a wonderful Cypress grouping with a lot of depth to it. This tree here is a coastal redwood or Sequoia sempervirens. It's actually proof that you can really reduce the size of trees in bonsai, because this tree in nature can grow up to 380 feet tall, the height of a skyscraper. And here it is in miniature in a pot, and this tree is over 25 years old. It's not the huge trunks that are collected in Northern California. This one here was grown from a small cutting many, many years ago. Here we have an old Hinoki cypress, or Cypress obtusa. They call it Hinoki in Japan. They're extensively used for building temples. They're known for their straight wood. This one has a beautifully curving trunk. A very beautiful, graceful, elegant tree. An absolutely outstanding eastern white cedar, or Thuja occidentalis. This tree was found hanging over a waterfall and is estimated to be almost 800 years old. Look at the amazing movement of its trunk and the dead wood, all natural on this tree. Here we have some medium-sized Thujas, or eastern white cedar. This one here was actually worked on by Sue Thin just this past spring. So it's a relatively new development, an old tree. You can check out the YouTube video of Sue Thin working on this tree. This one here was found in a swamp and pulled out of the bog by a friend's son. And Suthin and I worked on this tree during a workshop, so creating a lot of deadwood apex. Here we have another eastern white cedar, but unusual foliage. This tree's mother was found growing on a mountaintop in Saint-Pacôme, Quebec, and I actually recreated it from a cutting. The mother plant has been lost, but I did do a few cuttings. Very unusual foliage, but both Cypress and Thujas have an amazing number of cultivars, close to sometimes 1,000. A nice little Japanese yew, very compact, nice shape, great trees to grow as bonsai, especially if you only have a shady area to grow them in. Of course, this tour of my bonsai collection would not be complete without showing you my famous metasequoia or dawn redwood forest. This forest has been viewed by hundreds of millions of people. It's probably one of the most famous bonsai alive today. I love to bait you with some trees we've worked on in previous YouTube videos. And this one here was worked on quite a while back. This is a dwarf Canadian hemlock. The cultivar name is Jervis, and it's very compact foliage, and it's doing very well. They make great bonsai. Here is a selection of companion plants. We call them shitakusa. Any bonsai grower that thinks about showing their trees in a show usually must display them with a companion plant. These are compositions of diverse plants that I grow together to create lovely shitakusa or companion plants. This here is the growing section of my nursery. As you can see, the trees are all really in development. There's a lot of trident maples here and larger sized Japanese maples that will be cut down to be made into bonsai. Over here we have ginkgos. We have probably 20 or 30 cultivars of Japanese maples, weeping willows. So many species of trees that will be made into bonsai. Here we have about 20 different cultivars of Japanese maples. The cultivar I'm pruning just now is one called Shinda Shoujo. It means a new red, has bright red crimson leaves in the spring. A beautiful cultivar to transform into bonsai. And as you can see, I've let it grow out a bit because I've wanted to thicken up the trunk. We have many other cultivars. I have many rough bark Japanese maples. As they get older, the bark becomes very rough and it's really cool. Almost all these trees are created from air layers. We have many different cultivars. This one here was discovered by a local nurseryman. It's called Dainty Doll. We have one over here that's called Tobio Show. It came from Isley Nurseries in Oregon. We have many cultivars. This one here is a Sharp's Pygmy. Moving on to more refined Japanese maples. This tree was originally started by my first bonsai teacher, Jerry Stoll. He was in Stockton, New Jersey. This was one of his trees. This is a cultivar I call Hiroshima because it originally came from Hiroshima in Japan. This here is a Shinda Shoujo forest that I made for you last year in a YouTube. As you can see, during the summer, I lost one of the young trees, and we'll have to redo this video again in the spring. You'll see how it's developed since the last time. This is another Shinda Shoujo Japanese maple that I developed from a graft. It was grafted onto the base of a very old Japanese maple, and I also grafted roots on to complete the very thick base. The shape of the trunk is very interesting, beautiful curves to it. So this is, again, one of my, I think, favorites in the Japanese maple section. This cultivar is quite unusual. It originated as seeds from a botanical gardens in China. Its cultivar name is Aceripalmatum elegantissima, and I've been growing it since 1992. This Japanese maple has gone viral because my wife brought it in the house when its fall foliage was changing color. It's been reposted and reposted and reposted ever since then because of the amazing color of its fall foliage. This tree is quite old. It was started from a cutting in the beginning of the 1980s, and its cultivar name is Yao, a very, very old cultivar Japanese maple that exists in Japan, and it's a wonderful blue Nick lens container. This Japanese maple here belonged to one of my clients, Giselle. Unfortunately, probably about 10 years ago, the tops of these two trunks froze. So I recreated the tops since then. Unfortunately, it's just been sold to a client in Toronto. So yeah, I'm not going to be able to enjoy it anymore. This mixed forest is towering over me. It is about 53 inches tall. It has been displayed at an ABS convention in Saratoga Springs and also in a national show in Rochester in the USA. This forest was inspired by a lovely Japanese beech forest that we received at the Montreal Botanical Gardens in about 1980. It was in a yellowish round pot. This pot was bought from Dick Evans, a potter living in Florida. Originally, I wanted to create a mixed forest that represents a forest in the Laurentian area, which is north of Montreal. So I planted Japanese maples and Japanese beech and Cypress, so it would look like our natural forest. Well, unfortunately, the beech didn't last long. They were too much competition from the maples, and the last of the Cypress obtusa died probably about 4 or 5 years ago. I think they were outshaded by the maples. So in their place, probably about 10 years ago, I planted some Chinese elms, and there's also 2 species of Korean hornbeams in this forest. All in all, I think it's quite lovely. No, it's not tiny by any means, but it is towering and overwhelming. I love this forest. This is a wonderful 3-tree grouping of Japanese maples, a cultivar called Kiyohime, which is one of the dwarfest varieties of Japanese maples in existence. The mother plant was actually purchased in a 2-gallon nursery pot in about 45 years ago in Ajax, Ontario, and the 2 other trees were created from cuttings. This planting is planted in a very beautiful Nick lens oval container, one of the largest that he's ever made. One might think that this tree was just grown in a very naturalistic form without any pruning or wiring. Quite the contrary, this tree has been shaped for over 4 decades. It's been wired and pruned and made to look like this on purpose. Each movement of the tree has been planned and is precise. So it's a very beautiful, natural appearing bonsai, but there's a lot of artistry behind it. Here we have some selections of root over rock style Japanese maples. This Kotohime Japanese maple was grown over a beautiful Ibigawa stone from the Ibi River. You can see how beautifully the roots are draped over the stone. This is a beautiful Murasaki Kiyohime. Murasaki means purple because the edges of the leaves are purplish colored in the spring. And this one was planted over a wonderful stone that was found on the bottom of Lake Champlain. Here we have a Shinda Shoujo, a red leaf cultivar of Japanese maple. And this one is planted over a stone that comes from cold country in Pennsylvania. It was purchased at a bonsai symposium many, many years ago. And this tree was planted over this very, very hard stone. This is a really cool tree. When I was in Japan, many hedges were formed of these oak trees. This one here, I brought back 3 little acorns, and this tree is growing from an acorn that I started probably about maybe 22, 23 years ago, done in the semi-cascade style. This is an outstanding rock planting. These are semi-dwarf cultivar of Japanese maple. I do not know the cultivar name. They were all created from air layers, and they are planted on a beautiful Ibigawa stone that I bought in Japan probably about 25 years ago. And it's made to look like a landscape, trees growing on a cliff with a mountain tarn or lake down below that's filled with water. And also on the rock we have some dwarf Satsuki azaleas, we have a dwarf wild rose, we have some Selaginellus in here, or dwarf golden fern. All in all, it just makes a stupendous planting. Here we have a dogwood. Dogwood bonsai are beautiful, covered with white flowers in the spring, 4-petaled white flowers, and it's literally an outstanding bonsai in the spring, and later on it creates strawberry looking fruits, reddish color, that are very, very pretty in your collection. Japanese lindens, Tilia maximowitsiana here, 2 examples of them, originally of course discovered in Japan. And this one here is a European linden, but a dwarf variety called Tico dwarf. Here we have a Korean hornbeam, but it's not a Turksaninovi. This one here is actually Carpinus koreana. So here we have a 2-trunk Japanese hornbeam with some lovely hanging catkins. They're hanging from the branches, and they'll stay on the tree all winter long. More Japanese hornbeams, Carpinus japonica. Here we have a European linden. This one here is quite an unusual bonsai. Stewartia pseudo-camellia. It has wonderful white flowers that look like camellia flowers in midsummer. Here we have a Carpinus Turksaninovi, or a Korean hornbeam. Lovely old specimen, very delicate in appearance. And over here we have a Japanese privet, Ibota privet, Ligustrum obtusifolium. This is the beginning of a forest of Stewartia monodelpha. In the future, I'll be adding some smaller seedlings that I've started to add to this forest. Over here we have a forest of hackberries. The seeds were originally from Japan. The main trees were started in the 1990s, the beginning of the 90s, and I added several younger specimens over the years. This here is a Chinese hackberry. It's going dormant for the winter. It's losing its leaves, it's fall, it's ready. This one here is a Zelkova, a Japanese Zelkova, Zelkova serrata, and here it's in a broom style. And following it is a Corylopsis spicata, has wonderful yellow flowers. It's in the witch hazel family, but blooms in spring. I like ginkgo trees in my collection. This one here is over 60 years old. This here is a Ginkgo biloba, but it's a cultivar called chichi. Chichis mean breasts, so you can see the growths hanging downwards and growing upwards like stalactites and stalagmites. This is a ginkgo forest grown from seed. The mother plants are growing in a park in Montreal, so we have some old specimens here. And on the other side, here you can see the wonderful autumn colors, that beautiful golden yellow when the leaves change color in the fall. Some beautiful old euonymus or burning bushes here, or spindle trees is another common name, and the leaves have not changed or turned into bright red yet, but they will pretty soon. I've got a couple of old specimens and very, very many young specimens that are in training. I'm trying to preserve the apples on my apple trees because the birds get at them and the chipmunks climb up on the tables And I grow them all summer to have these beautiful apples, enjoy them in the fall to see them, maybe bring the tree in the house when it's so spectacular. So yes, I do cover my fruiting trees with a netting so that I'll be able to preserve the fruit just a bit longer. So here we have a Japanese crabapple. It's called Hime Ringo. Hime means beautiful, so the beautiful apple in Japanese. This one here is a dwarf variety called Molten Lava. We also have Japanese quinces. They are covered with beautiful yellow fruit at this time of year, but in spring they're truly spectacular. This one here is a variety called Toyo Nishiki, has 3 colors of flowers on the same plant, white, pink, and red, and all the variations of colors sometimes on the same flower. Spectacular. Here we have a flowering almond tree, actually grown by one of my friends, Michel Villeneuve, from seeds that he brought from his father's flowering almond growing on a terrace in Paris. Here we have another flowering crabapple, a molten lava, that was featured in one of my YouTubes. So you can always find it on YouTube and see its transformation. The size of the fruit is actually quite small, interesting. Nice size, nice proportions for a bonsai. Here we have a dwarf crabapple also that I hybridized myself from 2 varieties. So I guess I could name it after myself. I removed the top to create taper and I'm creating a new top to it. This will be the new top on it, all right? Nice size of fruit again. Over here in the corner we have a double flowering almond, Prunus triloba multiplex. A celastrus in fruit for the fall. Here we have some old Japanese and Chinese wisteria. This one, the leaves all turned yellow and my students removed them 2 days ago. Beautiful when they're in flower in the spring. This one is an outstanding example of taper. Weeping willows. This one here is actually a pussy willow. These are weeping willows that have been transformed into bonsai. Semi-cascade style apple tree, a slanting style Elaeagnus, which is all in flower at this time of year. And you have to watch out because the tree is full, as you can see, of bumblebees. They're all over in the tree. They're just going nuts. The flowers are so fragrant. And they'll turn into beautiful red fruits once they're pollinated. This here is another Japanese maple that has been under development for over 40 years. I've hacked it back here, and again here, and again here, and again over here, and again over here, and again over here, and again over here to create taper. So this is the fruit of 40 years of pruning, and now I am trying to create a new finer root system by air layering the base of the tree before I put it in a bonsai pot. This wonderful little grouping is actually one tree. It's a Chinese elm, but a cultivar called Catlin that I created from an air layer over 40 years ago. It was just shown in our local show and won the Public's Choice Award, which is the only award given during the Montreal Impinging Society's annual show. It was a favorite with the public. I have many other examples of Chinese elms. This one is probably the prettiest. This one has wonderful trunk movement, a double trunk with beautiful curving trunks. There's one humongous trunk at the end. You can see all the little Asiatic ladybugs that are crawling up and down the trunk looking for food at this time of year. Another extraordinary cultivar called Seiju elm. It was created or was discovered by Carl and Shin Young in California. Their nursery was called Seijuan, so they named this cultivar of Chinese elms after their nursery. Dwarf crabapple, or small fruiting crabapple, is a cultivar named Tina that I found at a local nursery, and I air layered. It was a standard. It was about 7 or 8 feet tall. So I air layered off the top to create a bonsai. You can see where I cut it and raised a branch to form the new top. So this is quite old. I've had it a long time in my collection. This is my largest trunked trident maple. It looks like a sumo wrestler. The trunk is so massive and stout and grounded into the soil. I air layered all the bottom to create a powerful root system many years ago. All the branches from the bottom up to this level were grafted into place. So the tree was highly engineered, transformed from A to Z. This charming little trident maple forest was created from individual trees, all from the same seed source, except these ones are 40 years older than the younger ones. The forest was put together about 20 years ago, and it's in a lovely Reho pot that brings out the summer freshness or coolness of this forest setting. Here we have another raft style trident maple grouping. This one here was created from an air layer from a branch of a very large trident maple, and the branch was laid on the ground to create a raft style. So all the trunks you see were originally smaller secondary branches along a main branch, and it's done in the slanting style. This is a very old Akebia cannata. It sets out violet colored flowers in the spring or whitish and forms violet colored fruits during the summer. It's a wonderful climbing plant, been transformed into a very beautiful semi-cascade style bonsai. Yes, I still have my tropical bonsai outside because it's one of the last warm days of summer. We have a Ficus microcarpa, a beautiful, strong, powerful trunk. And over here, we have a very large trunk of Ficus benjamina. This one was featured in a YouTube that I did a few years ago, which you'll be able to find on the internet. A small, but absolutely brilliant Brazilian rain tree. The trunk has beautiful movement. The branching is perfect. A stupendous example of a tropical bonsai. Some bougainvilleas. Here we have a bougainvillea royal purple that's in flower at this time of year. You can get them to flower about once every month and a half if you prune heavily after flowering. This is a Ficus Bert Davii that originates from South Africa. Oddly enough, this one was planted over the trunk of the Ficus benjamina. So when I did a demonstration, I removed it and planted it over this wonderful stone that I originally bought for a suiseki from Vancouver Island in British Columbia. Here we have a wonderful Ficus microcarpa, a beautiful example, needs a little bit more wiring. Here we have a Ficus nerifolia or salicifolia, a willow-leafed ficus. Over here, this beautiful fall coloring is a Chinese quince. And not only are they known for their fall coloring, but large yellow fruits in the fall that look like almost huge lemons. And also in the spring, the bark exfoliates and you get these wonderful colors, 2 or 3 different colors, beiges and pinks and browns. It's a wonderful exfoliating trunk. We also can grow cotoneasters as bonsai. Cotoneaster is a wonderful small leaf variety of fruiting tree that's in the rose family, closely related to apples. The fruits look like miniature apples. Wonderful. I love my American elms. They're going dormant now for the winter. They've lost a lot of their leaves, but they're spectacular at every time of the year. Here we have some lovely fall color on this Japanese calacarpa or beautyberry. Usually at this time of year it's covered with little purple berries, but I pruned it heavily this summer so you don't see the berries this year. Thorny Elaeagnus, completely in flower. It has literally thousands of flowers, and I can't get too close. There's just too many bees that are all over the plant. They're just so excited by flowers at this time of year. A twisted trunk pomegranate here, unpruned because I want to air layer off the top. But this one here is a Grewia occidentalis, originating again in South Africa. The red means I'm going to air layer off the top right here. So you see, folks, all of this material here, this nursery material, it's all been acquired for the express purpose of transforming it into bonsai, so that one day this will be amazing bonsai that you'll be able to see on my tables. So stay with us, follow us, subscribe, and you'll see the end results of all of this work. I hope you enjoyed today's tour of my collection, and I hope it inspires you. It's giving you some ideas for growing your collection so that one day you too will have an absolutely amazing bonsai collection. So good luck. A bonsai artist never truly owns his trees. Some may say he hoards them, but how can one hoard what is alive, what keeps teaching you? Each tree is a companion of decades, a labor of love, a fragment of your soul refined with every passing year. Yet life, like pruning, asks for sacrifice. Sometimes a tree must be sold to mend the roof, or to send a daughter to college, to keep the journey going. And though the bench feels emptier, your heart finds peace knowing those trees continue their stories, held by new hands, admired by new eyes. Seasons turn. You look back and you realize the trees have aged as you have. Their bark thickens, their posture bends, their beauty deepens. They remind you that all things worth shaping, bonsai, character, life, require patience, loss, and love. In the end, when I meet my Creator, I will not bring my trees with me, only what they have taught me: to endure, to adapt, to grow in stillness, and to bloom when it's time.